So next speaker is Megan Park. Hi, Megan. Thanks for joining. She's from Aaron Drucker's group in Toronto, in Canada. I'm just going to present an observational analysis of the association between atopic dermatitis and weather and climate conditions, a systematic review and meta-analysis. So looking forward to hearing your presentation, Megan.
Thank you. Let me just share my PowerPoint. Okay, do you see the screen?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Megan, and I'm a medical student at the University of Toronto in Toronto, Canada. And today I'll be sharing on our soon-to-be published systematic review on the association between climate conditions, weather changes, and air pollutants with atopic dermatitis. I have no conflict of interest to disclose. So, as many of you may probably know, climate change and air pollution are major health threats to our healthcare system worldwide. Growing body of evidence suggests relationship between environmental conditions and atopic dermatitis, the most common chronic inflammatory skin condition affecting up to 15% of individuals globally. Associations between pollutants, climate, and atopic dermatitis remain uncertain in literature. Some studies link atopic dermatitis to higher levels of particulate matter and harmful gases like carbon monoxide and nitrous oxide, while others find no association. Therefore, the objective of this study was to synthesize the associations between environmental factors, including air pollution, meteorological conditions, and climate, and outcomes in adults with atopic dermatitis. For the methods, we conducted a systematic review and meta-analysis. We followed Prisma Peak guidelines and searched Medline, Embase, and Cochrane databases from inception until June 2024. We did not apply any search restrictions based on language, date, or country, and included any original observational study. More specifically now, we included studies if over 50% of participants were adults, and we examined the following pre-specified exposures from a literature review. So we included ambient air pollutants such as nitrous dioxide, sulfur dioxide, particulate matter of less than 10 micrograms or micrometers, PM 2.5, carbon dioxide, ozone, temperature, precipitation, sunlight, humidity, secondhand smoking, seasonal variations, and pollution from traffic or industrial sources. Included studies presented a measurement of the association between the environmental factor and at least one atopic dermatitis outcome, such as severity. We grouped and synthesized by exposure and outcome measured. And when meta-analysis was not possible, we used the SWIM guidelines for narrative analysis. We performed meta-analysis when 3 or more studies reported on the same exposure with similar standardized units and outcome measurement. The primary effect measure was chosen based on the most commonly reported estimates, such as the odds ratio or risk ratio. We assess the certainty of evidence for all outcomes using the GRADE approach. We assess the methodological quality of each study using the JBI checklist, and the risk of bias was appraised using the Robin-Z tool. A directed acyclic graph was developed to conceptualize potential causal relationships and to assess the risk of confounding bias. So for our results, we screened around 9,145 title and abstracts, 130 full texts, and included a total of 42 studies in 14 countries, with China being the most common country where the studies came from. We judged studies to be of generally high quality with moderate risk of bias per the Robin-Z tool. And next, I'll share some of our main results. So looking at ambient air pollution and daily atopic dermatitis emergency department or outpatient visits, we found that higher levels of exposure to particulate matter of diameter of less than 10 micrometers, as well as 2.5 micrometers, is probably associated with increased risk of daily atopic dermatitis medical visits, and we were able to find a pooled risk ratio of around 1.01. Next, higher levels of exposure to ozone may be associated with increased number of daily atopic dermatitis medical visits. And higher levels of exposure to sulfur dioxide and nitrogen dioxide are both probably associated with increased number of daily atopic dermatitis medical visits, with a pooled risk ratio of 1.03. Finally, higher levels of exposure to carbon monoxide may have little to no association with increased number of daily atopic dermatitis related visits. Next, looking at the meteorological conditions and seasonal variation, we found that higher temperatures, such as in hot climates or seasons, are associated with increased atopic dermatitis medical visits. We also found that lower temperatures are probably associated with increased daily atopic dermatitis visits. However, both cold and warm seasons had little to no association with atopic dermatitis severity. High precipitation, such as rain, may be associated with increased atopic dermatitis severity, and high levels of humidity is probably associated with increased atopic dermatitis severity. Increased duration of sunlight exposure may have little to no association with increased atopic dermatitis severity. Lastly, looking at the traffic exposure and secondhand smoking, we found that secondhand smoking exposure is probably associated with increased atopic dermatitis prevalence. Traffic and industrial plant exposure, measured by proximity to these plants, may be associated with increased atopic dermatitis prevalence. So overall, we found evidence supporting harmful associations between various ambient air pollutants and population-level atopic dermatitis activity. We found that a 10 microgram per meter cubed increase in PM10, PM2.5, NO2, nitrous dioxide, or sulfur dioxide correlates with a 1.1 to 3% increased risk of emergency department and outpatient visits for atopic dermatitis, which can have a significant impact on cities and regions depending on their population size. The population-weighted mean air pollution concentration also varies significantly by country. For example, substantially higher in China versus the United States. In 2021, the World Health Organization did tighten air quality guidelines, though the implementation remains uneven worldwide, such as lower income countries with high population levels, and even within high income countries such as the United States, where there are racial and ethnic minorities that are disproportionately exposed to air pollution. There are some mechanistic studies that offer explanations for the relationship between air pollutants and atopic dermatitis, such as genetic studies on the aryl hydrocarbon receptor transcription factor triggering atopic dermatitis-like outcomes, and the flag mutations that are strongly linked to atopic dermatitis severity by altering the skin microbiome. So some limitations to our study are that the heterogeneity in pollutant metrics across regions. The studies also may have overrepresented moderate to severe atopic dermatitis cases looking at emergency department visits. The socioeconomic confounding was not well characterized, and there were very few studies with subgroup analysis based on age, region, and limited data available for meta-analysis. So in conclusion, increased air pollution and other environmental factors were associated with increased prevalence and activity of atopic dermatitis. These findings have direct public health implications, adding to the impetus to decrease pollution and mitigate climate change worldwide. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
It's a nice hope, the climate change worldwide. And thank you for your very nice presentation. I have one question. In the study you used for your review, did you have some knowledge about asthma or other atopic diseases associated with atopic dermatitis, or?
Yeah, that's a good question. We didn't look at asthma, unfortunately, and we restricted our search to only adults because there were some literature already that was synthesized in children. So we wanted to focus our population a little bit. However, I believe there were one or two studies that we discussed in our discussion as well that looked at older females, and we aren't quite sure the reason why, but we found a correlation that older female adults had greater severity of atopic dermatitis and were more susceptible to these climate change. And we were looking at more of these like mechanistic studies of what may be going on, but we weren't quite sure of that relation there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have no other question on my pad, so thank you very much for your presentation, and I let Bob present our next speaker.